So it's 8 o'clock. We'll get started here. My name is Torrique. I'll be presenting today. And I'm joined by Bradley Wade of LAL.
Hi there.
And Wolfgang Krause from Good Hope Studies.
Hi, everyone. Good evening.
Okay. Both schools are based in Cape Town. And I'd like to welcome you today for joining us to get some information on South Africa, some updates on the country and COVID situation. And I will start my presentation by sharing a screen with you. You will probably only have access to the presentation while I speak. There is a chat function and a Q&A function on the right side. Please feel free to make use of it. Brad and Wolfgang will be managing that. They'll be answering your questions. And should you need anything which is a bit more in-depth and requires a verbal answer, we will manage that at the end of the presentation. So once again, just a little welcome. My name is Torrique. I am the CEO of EduSA and South African. For those of you, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending where you're coming from. It's evening here in South Africa. For those of you who do not know where South Africa is, you can see there on the map, we are the most southern country in Africa. And in the southwestern corner, the little icon there is Cape Town, which I'm dialing in from. So I will start with our borders because this is the easiest way to come about. Last week we had some very good news from the government whereby they fully opened international borders to anybody, no matter the COVID situation in your country. This is a huge relief not only to the language schools, but also to the greater tourism industry, particularly because South Africa does not have the government financial support as some of your other countries. And the borders have only been opened due to the very strict protocols which will come into play within the country and on arrival. The idea being that because there are such strict entry requirements for COVID, there's a very low risk of travelers either bringing it in or taking it and transmitting it in the community. So I've got a list of the COVID requirements here. The very important one is a PCR test, which is negative, taken not more than 72 hours before departure from the home country. This is non-negotiable. Travelers are expected to travel with travel insurance, comprehensive travel insurance. That would cover any potential quarantine costs should somebody enter the country with COVID and any additional testing costs. When somebody comes into the airport, they will be screened on arrival, tested for their temperature, and checked for any signs of COVID. Any traveler with COVID symptoms will be tested, and should they test positive, they will need to go into a 10-day quarantine at a designated hotel facility. This is why the travel insurance is so important. And any visitor is required to download a special track and tracing app on their smartphone in case they come into contact with somebody with COVID. The great thing about South Africa, in a sense, is that there's a lot of experience with diseases. And for example, all the screening equipment and processes at the airport are already in place from the previous Ebola outbreak in 2014 to 2016. And generally, the contact tracing in the country has been very effective because of the HIV epidemic in South Africa. With regards to immigration, since the borders opened, immigration is fully functioning as in previous COVID times. South African embassies around the world are all open and fully operational, although they do have a significant backlog which they are dealing with from the time during lockdown when the embassies were closed, so responses are a little bit slower than usual. There is also no change to previous immigration policy. So everything that you used to implement or advise your students, that all remains. All that is different are the COVID entry requirements when entering the country. With regards to visas, I've got a little map illustration for you to see. So South Africa has two, let's call it two separations in terms of visas. One are countries that are visa exempt and can get a visa stamp at the airport, and the others are nationals that need to apply for a visa in advance. The dark green would be nationals that get a 90-day visitor visa on arrival, and the light green, a 30-day visitor visa on arrival. These visas can be extended for an additional 90 days, which means your 90-day visitor can stay for 180 days, and your 30-day visitor for 120 days. The orange represents those nations that need to apply for a visa, and they can apply either for a visitor visa or a study visa, depending on how long they plan to stay in the country. Just for your reference, the grayed out countries are those English-speaking countries. So as we get on to traveling to South Africa, just a small illustration of the COVID situation here. And that is our COVID curve. And you will see that the peak happened in July and August. And since then, it has largely remained stable. There are still cases ongoing, but at a lower rate. And that's being managed within the community. So now that you know the borders are open, COVID is not too prevalent, we would go on to the health protocols within the country. This is very important for your students to be sure that they are safe in South Africa, that they do not need to worry and stress too much that protocols aren't being followed, that they aren't safe, that parents are sending their children to a country where they are not making their best efforts to ensure that everyone is safe. In April 2020, EduSA was the first national association of language schools worldwide to start working on protocols with regards to reopening. This was only 1 month after our schools had been forced to close and the borders had closed. We are part of a greater tourism organization, and these protocols were part of an industry-wide engagement and development of protocols for tourism in the country, which resulted in the TBCSA protocols, which you will see highlighted in blue. I believe the presentation will be available for download afterwards. So if you are interested, you will be able to click on the link and see in detail the protocols that are out there, and they are very extensive. So that was an entire countrywide, industry-wide engagement, which we have a very comprehensive document for the industry to follow. Not only language schools, but the greater tourist industry, because your students will naturally go on other tourist activities. These protocols are accredited and have been vetted by the World Travel and Tourism Council. And there's also a related app which the companies are using for continuous self-assessment with regards to the protocols. Our schools were authorized to open from June, and borders were closed. So not everybody opened, but gradually schools have started to open. As I said before, Good Hope and LAL are both open. Good Hope has been open in June. And although borders are closed, schools have operated off a very low base, which has given them an opportunity to put the protocols into practice, which is very important, so that when the student numbers start to increase, the schools are well versed and understood and practicing the protocols as needed. With regards to the protocols, as I said, it's a very in-depth document. These points are highlighting some of the key areas which are implemented across the tourist value chain. Not only language schools, your restaurants, your hotels, your tour buses. Health screening would be typically asking if you have any COVID symptoms. If you go into a restaurant, a language school, this is what you will experience. They will take down your personal details for track and tracing, check your temperature. There will be signage everywhere, which is especially important for language students who maybe don't always understand what is spoken to them, especially if they have a low level. Everyone has staff training, and every company has an official COVID officer who is in charge of managing and coordinating COVID response within the business. PPE, that's personal protective equipment. That would be your face masks, your face shields. So in South Africa, wearing a mask is mandatory. Inside the classroom, students are expected to wear masks. Also in the public areas, so that is mandatory and in practice. The sanitizing both hands and surfaces. In South Africa, we have a lot of labor. So when you walk into the supermarket, for example, there will always be a staff member ready to both spray your hands and make sure that everybody is sanitizing their hands before they come in. Within the language schools, teachers are wiping down door handles, surfaces, keeping windows open. Luckily, we have warmer weather over here, so there's proper ventilation within the classrooms. And social distancing is being practiced across the country. South Africa not being too much of a populated country, this is also a little bit easier. Then with regards to the protocols, just to give you an example of who the protocols relate to, we've got our language schools and other tertiary institutions, vehicles, such as transport, tour buses, Uber drivers, accommodations relating to student residents, hotels, backpackers, bed and breakfasts, Airbnb, your restaurants, bars and kitchens, and then your laundry and other services. And at this point, I need to say that there has been a huge buy-in from the greater industry into these protocols because the government was extremely strict in allowing the greater tourism and hospitality industry to open. The private sector needed to come forward and propose the solution to the COVID problem. And only when government was satisfied after 6 months did they slowly begin to open these economies. So there's a lot of buy-in locally to ensure that we stay open. With regards to restrictions, so officially South Africa is in level 1 lockdown. Financial situation with government has meant that level 1 basically means that as much of the economy is open with the limitation on potential super spreader events. So we've got the mandatory wearing of masks in public, like we have in most parts of the world. There is a curfew from 12 to 4 a.m. in the morning. That is kind of works in hand with the fact that nightclubs remain closed. So in theory, if there are no clubs around, you're less likely to have people walking around at those hours anyway. And then there are limits on private gatherings at home of 10 people and public gatherings, both indoors and outdoors, 250 and 500 people respectively. How it works with public areas is that they are able to use up 50% of the floor space. So this can relate to casinos, gyms, any sort of public entity. And then, as we've seen around the world, no live sports events or concerts. With regards to a market recovery, in South Africa, we are cautiously positive. One of our key kickstarts of the recovery is the rest of Africa. South Africa is the tertiary education capital of Africa, and Africa as a continent is quite used to having dangerous diseases. And we would expect a rather quick uptake in African students from the beginning of next year, looking towards the start of the university year. So that's quite a positive for us, and that's something which can at least keep schools going while the pandemic situation settles down. The timing of our border opening has also been key. Opening 1 week ago has meant that students intending to travel in our peak season in January have enough time to book and have enough certainty to book. So although we won't get the same numbers as before, we are hoping for a bit more students than we expected 2 weeks ago when borders were closed. We are also into our spring and heading into our summer season. So firstly, that's obviously a natural holiday time. People from the northern hemisphere look to escape to the south. But more importantly, because it's warm, people are outside. They're not sitting inside, huddling in groups. And that's the fact that people are out, one assumes, and what we've seen is that hopefully can keep COVID under control, although it is already under control for the moment, which leads me to the COVID stability and the general situation within South Africa. So we are experiencing second waves in other parts of the world. I don't guarantee anything because we've seen how quickly things can change. But for the past few months, the situation here has been quite stable. And the fact that we are heading into warmer times has been positive. And the population has been quite well trained on COVID protocols and what is required to manage the virus, particularly because we had quite an extensive, long, hard lockdown in the beginning. And I believe the public is quite traumatized and is not keen to go back to that. With regards to South Africa and why anybody would like to travel to South Africa during such an uncertain time in the world, I believe that South Africa is one of the only ELT destinations at the moment that have full access to the country and global access for everybody to travel to. This is obviously a huge positive and allows certainty to book in advance, which I think is very important. South Africa generally is a destination which I will call it under tourism, as the opposite to over tourism, where we don't have hordes of tourists in all your main tourist attractions congregating, using up all the resources, particularly during this time, which means that a tourist can come to South Africa, enjoy all its highlights, and not have to be worried about sitting, for example, like in a sardine can on a bus or on a tour bus, and not having access to the tourist resources. The pricing is also generally competitive, but right now I would say it's ultra competitive. Prices across the value chain have been sliced, so you can pick up quite nice deals for all the services along the way. And then, the reason people travel to South Africa for the nature, your sports in the nature, your hiking, your surfing, going to the beaches, safaris, these are all naturally social distance friendly activities. And these are the highlights of the country. So all, pre-COVID, everything that we promoted within the country to bring people here, right now they're even more attractive because these are activities that people can undergo safely when in the country. So yeah, that's my little chat on South Africa, little update. I will end the presentation, and yeah, very looking forward to welcoming some students from you. And I'm going to open the floor. Brad and Wolfgang have been checking Q&A questions, and if there are any questions, we can address them. I see they're not really, so what we will do is I'll hand over to Brad and Wolfgang to maybe give a short, feeling of how the school operation is working during this COVID period.
Yes,
So,
if I may ask quickly, hello to everyone. My name is Wolfgang. I'm from Good Hope Studies, a well-established language school in Cape Town. We are in operation for 25 years now, and we are getting students from all over the world. And unfortunately, due to the official lockdown in South Africa, we had to close our school in March. We have been able to open it again on the 22nd of June. Which was great, and which allowed us to serve those clients who have waited during the lockdown in Cape Town. And we have started off very small with, I think, 36 students then, with all the COVID measures in place so that our staff and students are safe while being at the school. Well, we have some months of experience, and I must say it's working really well. We haven't had an issue or an infection at the school, and clients as well as staff feel equally safe. Every person getting onto our premises the temperature is taken. We have sanitizing stations right at the entrance and throughout of our schools. We have two campuses in Cape Town. One is in the southern suburbs in Newlands, close to the University of Cape Town, while the other one is right in the city center of Cape Town in an office building. And this works really well. Every client has a dedicated desk at the school where the students sits every day. We provide them with face masks and face shields, and they're comfortable and happy to be with us. And not to get too long, I think I hand over to Brad from LEL.
Yeah, thanks, Wolfgang. Yes, my name's Bradley Wade. I'm from LEL Language Centres. And as Wolfgang said, we're also open here in Cape Town, and we've had the opportunity, as Torrique mentioned, to put all the COVID protocols in place. We had a few students who were in lockdown in South Africa and couldn't go home and joined us, so we opened up the school. And we've had one or two students actually travel in, which is fantastic. And they're really enjoying it. They haven't enjoyed the online version of the courses as much. The human interaction is far better. And our school, although we're on a slightly smaller staff base, we've got slightly fewer students. It's looking promising. South Africa is the first destination that you can travel to now for tourism, for English language travel, for study purposes. And so, Wolfgang, myself and other schools are open, and South Africa is open to welcome all students. So we look forward to seeing many more. And you can be rest assured they're in safe hands here, and they're going to have a fantastic time. Torrique?
Cool, thanks, Brad. We actually made it just on time, and before we get kicked off, I just want to thank Brad and Wolfgang for joining, and thank everyone else for attending. I hope it's been useful, and I believe our details will be shared afterwards. So if you have any further questions, you're always welcome to give us a shout, pop us an email, whatever you like. And yeah, we're looking forward to opening and welcoming your students. Cool.
Great.
Cheers,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Good evening.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.